This is Bob Fleenor. I'm a Read Aloud West Virginia volunteer in Berkeley County. I read to fifth graders at Mill Creek and Orchard View Intermediate Schools. Today for Christmas, I'd like to share with you a very old and very famous Christmas story. It was written in the year 1905 by O. Henry, which was the pen name of an author named William Sidney Porter. The title of the story, The Gift of the Magi. $1.87. That was all. She had put it aside, 1 cent and then another and then another, in her careful buying of meat and other food. Della counted it 3 times. $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There was nothing to do but fall on the bed and cry, so Della did it. Della finished her crying and cleaned her face. She stood by the window and looked out with no interest. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy her husband, Jim, a gift. She'd put aside as much as she could for months, but his salary of only $20 a week is not much. Everything had cost more than she had expected. Suddenly, she turned from the window and looked in the mirror. Quickly, she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its complete length. Della and Jim were very proud of 2 things which they owned. One thing was Jim's gold pocket watch. It had once belonged to his father, and long ago, his father's father. The other thing was Della's hair. If a queen had lived in the rooms near theirs, Della would have washed and dried her hair where the queen could see it. Della knew her hair was more beautiful than any queen's jewels and gifts. If a king had lived in the same house with all his riches, Jim would have looked at his watch every time they met. Jim knew no king had anything so valuable. So now, Della's beautiful hair fell about her, shining like a falling stream of brown water. It reached below her knee. It almost made itself into a dress for her. And then she put it up on her head again, nervously and quickly. She put on her old brown coat. She put on her old brown hat. With the bright light still in her eyes, she moved quickly out the door and down to the street. Where she stopped, the sign said, Mrs. Sofroni, hair articles of all kinds. Up to the 2nd floor, Della ran and stopped to get her breath. Mrs. Sofroni, large, cold-eyed, looked at her. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Mrs. Sofroni. Take your hat off and let me look at it. Down fell the brown waterfall. $20, said Mrs. Sofroni. Give it to me quick, said Della. Oh, and the next 2 hours seemed to fly. She was going from one shop to another to find a gift for Jim. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the shops, and she had looked in every shop in the city. It was a gold watch chain, very simply made. Its value was in its rich and pure material. It was good enough for the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew that Jim must have it. It was like him, quietness and value. Jim and the chain both had quietness and value. She paid $21 for it, and she hurried home with the chain and 87 cents. With the chain on his watch, Jim could look at his watch and learn the time anywhere he might be. Though the watch was so fine, it had never had a fine chain before. He would sometimes take it out and look at it only when no one could see him do it. When Della arrived home, her mind quieted a little. She began to think more reasonably. She started to try to cover the sad marks of what she'd done to her hair. Within 40 minutes, her hair looked a little better. She stood in the mirror a long time. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself, before he looks at me a second time, he'll say I look like a girl who sings and dances for money. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with just $1.87? At 7 o'clock, Jim's dinner was ready for him. Jim was never late. Della held the watch chain in her hand and sat near the door where he always entered. Then she heard his step in the hallway, and her face lost color for a moment. She often said little prayers quietly about simple everyday things, and now she said, "Please, God, make him think I'm still pretty." The door opened and Jim stepped in. He looked very thin, and he was not smiling. Poor fellow, he was only 22 and with a family to take care of. He needed a new coat, and he had nothing to cover his cold hands. Jim stopped inside the door. His eyes looked strangely at Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not understand. It filled her with fear. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor anything she'd been ready for. He simply looked at her with that strange expression on his face. Della went to him. "Jim, dear," she cried, "don't look at me like that. I had my hair cut off and sold it. I couldn't live through Christmas without giving you a gift. My hair will grow again. You won't care, will you? My hair grows very fast. It's Christmas, Jim. Let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I bought for you." "You've cut off your hair?" said Jim slowly. He seemed to labor to understand what had happened. "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. "Don't you like me now? I'm me, Jim. I'm the same without my hair." Jim looked around the room. You say your hair is gone?" "You don't have to look for it," said Della. "It's sold, I tell you, sold and gone. It's the night before Christmas, boy. Be good to me, because I sold it for you. Maybe the hairs on my head could be counted, but no one could ever count my love for you. Shall we eat dinner, Jim?" Jim put his arms around Della. Then, from inside his coat, he took something tied in paper. He threw it upon the table. "I want you to understand me, Dell. Nothing like a haircut could make me love you any less. But if you'll open that, you may know what I felt when I came in." White fingers pulled off the paper, and then a cry of joy, and then a change to tears. For there lay the combs that Della had seen in a shop window and loved for a long time. Beautiful combs with jewels, perfect for her beautiful hair. She had known they cost too much for her to buy them. She had looked at them without the least hope of owning them. And now they were hers. But her hair was gone. But she held them to her heart, and at last was able to look up and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then she jumped up and cried, Oh, Jim had not seen his beautiful gift. She held it out to him in her open hand. The gold seemed to shine softly, as if with her own warm and loving spirit. "Isn't it perfect, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at your watch 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how they look together." Jim sat down and smiled. "Della," said he, "let's put our Christmas gifts away and keep them a while. They're too nice to use now. I sold the watch to get the money to buy the combs. And now I think we should have our dinner." The Magi, as you might know, were wise men wonderfully wise men who brought gifts to the newborn Christ child. They were the first to bring Christmas gifts. Being wise, their gifts were doubtless wise ones. And here, I've told you the story of two children who were not wise. Each sold the most valuable thing he owned in order to buy a gift for the other. But let me speak a last word to the wise of these days. Of all who gave gifts, these two were the most wise. Of all who give and receive gifts, such as they are the most wise. They are the Magi. The end. So on behalf of everyone at Read Aloud, West Virginia, I wish all of you a very Merry Christmas, a joyous holiday season, and the happiest of New Years. And we hope to get to see you in the classroom very soon.